Welcome to this week's episode of Insight. During this week's show, we're going to cover three topics. The first one is going to be the illegal kidnapping of the Artsakh leaders by the Aliyev regime from a few weeks ago. Then we're going to move on to talk about the Prime Minister's speech in front of the European Parliament in Strasbourg and what he went over. And at the end, we will talk about the lack of accountability in regards to the disaster in Artsakh by the entire leadership of this country. The first topic of the week is the illegal arrest and detention of the Artsakh leadership and Ruben Vardanyan by the Aliyev regime from a few weeks back. First and foremost, there's absolutely no legal grounds for their arrest. They have never been Azeri citizens. The territory that they ran has never been part of Azerbaijan until it was taken over a few weeks ago. So there's actually no legal grounds to charge any of these people. And for those in the international community that actually consider Artsakh to be part of Azeri territory, what's ironic is these are the only people in the history of that country that have actually ever been elected in real democratic elections where the free will of the people was expressed. In essence, these are democratic leaders being persecuted for being nothing more than democratic leaders. What we have found out is they were essentially not arrested by the Aliyev regime. They're actually arrested by the Russians and turned over to the Aliyev regime, most likely in some cases probably sold as they would in any kind of a hostage situation. What these people are, in essence, are hostages and bargaining chips for future negotiations with Armenia. What is the lesson here to be learned is that there's one difference in being an enemy of the Russian state, of a friend of the Russian state, and that is, there's no difference. Now let's move on to the second topic of the week, which was an interesting speech that the Armenian Prime Minister made in front of the European Parliament. He was invited to speak there, which is actually quite an interesting honor. These are some of the points that he went over. The first one is that Armenia wants to move towards EU and the West formally. He called out the Russian role, the Russian state role in the ethnic cleansing in Artsakh. He called out the Baku regime for being insincere in trying to achieve peace and in the peace process. And most interestingly, he actually accused the Russian government of trying to overthrow his government in the post-genocide ethnic cleansing period. And what I liked the most is something that a comment that he made about everyone, including European officials, in which he said, "I do not accept the surprised faces of some international officials regarding the depopulation of Karabakh in September." And for that, I say good for him. He obviously went on to call for aid, economic aid, to deal with the refugee outflow and the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh. And he outlined the fact that he's still willing to sign a peace treaty with the other side by the end of the year, even though at this point that is not in any way a realistic prospect. Now, this speech in Strasbourg by the Prime Minister brought a very strong response from the Russian state. First and foremost, the Russian officials started comparing him to Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine, which to them is the highest insult. Then they went on to compare Armenia and call it the third front after Moldova in the war that the West is waging against Russia. What is very clear from this speech is that we've actually crossed a Rubicon as far as our direction moving towards the West or getting away from Russia. And at this point, there's really no going back after the tenor of the speech that was made a few days ago. Now I'm going to move on to the third topic of the week, and the most important one, which is what I call the issue of accountability when it comes to the ethnic cleansing and the genocide in Artsakh. It's been a few weeks since the second Armenian genocide, and there's not been a single major speech that has been made by any of our leaders explaining this historic moment, or nothing that matches the brevity of the moment, the gravity of the moment. Here we have, there's been speeches here or there, interviews here or there, but there's nothing that stands out as far as making a speech to the country. A speech that acknowledges, one, the pain that the country is going through, the real pain and the struggle, and at the same time points towards a direction of what we need to do as a country and what our goals should be. And when I was thinking about where this really comes from, I think this poverty of political imagination, I think first and foremost comes from what I call a deficit in democratic thinking. And what that comes from is that the leaders really don't feel that they are accountable to people in every possible way, and most importantly, the need to explain themselves. And secondly, is the purpose of taking responsibility. There's not a single current or former leader that is willing to publicly take responsibility for actions that they have taken that brought us to this moment. Obviously, the current government is more responsible, but this is something that goes back 30 years, and the road that brought us to Artsakh, has happened while the state was being run through the hands of multiple governments. This country gave 10,000 lives. There's 10,000 mostly young men buried in cemeteries across Artsakh and Armenia over the past 30 years. And no one feels the moral need to be able to explain this catastrophe to this nation or to the parents of those young men, mostly, who were lost in this war. Then we move on to people that are not in power right now, like our current opposition. Where are they in calling out this government for its lack of leadership and moral clarity on this issue? They're not calling out, they're not demanding accountability, and they're not essentially showing us any way out. Then you move to our church, the big men in Eshmiadzin. Last I checked, your faith says, without a vision, that people perish. Where is your vision? Where are you speaking to the country? The heart of the matter, and the reason that we don't have these speeches to the country, is that, frankly, none of our current or former leaders have ever had a vision of what they want the country to be. Because with vision also comes responsibility, and the responsibility to explain yourself. And if you have no vision, frankly, you have nothing to say that is actually worth listening to. Furthermore, and this to me is actually the most important thing, is the biggest disappointment for me is not our leadership. The biggest disappointment is us, is the population, that we're not demanding accountability. I happened to be watching a documentary about the 1973 war in Israel, in which had inconclusive results. And within 6 months, there was a national commission that studied the war and the political outcomes. And immediately afterward, 3 of the top people running the military lost their job. Where is our demand for accountability for the politics and the military failures that have brought us to this moment? The truth of it is, if you're not angry at this moment, if you're not enraged at this moment, there's something really seriously wrong with you. I will close this section by saying we have a lot of pent-up anger and energy, or we should at this point. But none of this should be geared towards a negative direction. And we should not be doing stupid things like blocking the Armenian ambassador from going to events in Canada. What we need to do is to take our energy and take our efforts and take our angst and to focus on what's necessary, is to build the country and the state that we need. A country that can protect itself, that's affluent and democratic, and can take care of its own issues. We're going to close with reviewing a speech that the dictator of Baku made in Stepanakert last week. And what can you say about it? Actually, if you sit through and read through the transcripts, it's straight out of North Korea, to be honest. There's really no other way to say it. He blamed all the ills of his country on the very few years in which his family was not running that country. As you know, they've been running that country continually in Soviet times from 1969 to now, except for a short time period. And apparently all of the problems of the country were created in those 3 or 4 years. Then he moved on to this fantastically made up stories about how happy Armenians were under his father's rule during Soviet times, that they were clearly not oppressed. Then he made some personal, pointless attacks on Artsakh leaders. Frankly, all of this while he was looking entirely pathetic, walking around these empty streets and buildings and walking through Artsakh flags as he's some college student in some demonstration. In conclusion, what the degenerate in Baku highlighted is that he highlighted everything that we need to know about him, that he's a small, insecure man who at this point is far more obsessed with his opposition inside of the country, which is, by the way, entirely powerless, than anything else. Thank you for joining me in these episode of Insights.
We must stand as one, or fall divided. A lesson hard learned. Shackle will be struck from every slave upon our path. We will see our numbers grow. And when they have become legion, we will face Glaba and the hordes of Rome again. And the gods shall weep for their suffering.